There are things we start doing as we get older that the people around us may quietly hate, but almost nobody will tell us to our face. They don't hate you. They hate how certain habits make them feel when they're around you. And the dangerous part is that most of us can't see these behaviors from the inside. Here are 7 of them, and number 1 can slowly turn every family visit into something people begin to dread. Number 7, you turn every conversation back to yourself. This is one of the easiest habits to fall into because it comes disguised as a desire to connect. A friend mentions they're having a difficult time with their teenage grandson, and within 10 seconds you cut in. You think that's bad? When your brother was 16, he ran our station wagon straight into the ditch. Your daughter starts telling you about a stressful week at work, and before she can finish, you're already narrating a story from 1984 about your old office manager. From the inside, you believe you're empathizing. You think you're saying, I understand what you're going through because I've lived something like it too. What lands on the other side is entirely different. The person sitting across from you feels like their story has been quietly taken away and replaced with yours. They came to be heard, and instead they became an audience. Eventually, people stop bringing you their lives at all, not because they don't trust you, because they've learned that every road in the conversation eventually leads back to you, no matter where it started. There's a particular moment that reveals this pattern clearly. Someone starts telling you about something genuinely difficult, a diagnosis in the family, a marriage struggling, a decision they're afraid to make, and you find the connection to your own life within seconds. Not because you don't care about their situation, because your mind has spent decades organizing the world around your own experiences, and that habit doesn't simply switch off because someone else needs the space this time. The person watching your face light up with recognition, ready to launch into your own version of their struggle, often makes a small, permanent decision in that moment. They decide this particular topic isn't safe to bring to you again, not because you did anything cruel, because being interrupted mid-vulnerability by someone else's memory teaches a lesson faster than almost anything else, that this room isn't actually built for their story to land. It's worth noticing how this habit tends to intensify with age, rather than soften. As the years accumulate, so does the reservoir of stories, comparisons, and past experiences available to draw from. Nearly anything someone says can trigger a related memory, a similar situation from decades ago, a story that feels, in the moment, perfectly relevant to share. But relevance to you and relevance to the conversation are not always the same thing. The person across from you didn't come to hear about 1984. They came because something is happening in their life right now, and they were hoping for a few minutes that the conversation could actually be about that.
Number 6, you expect people to read your mind, then resent them when they don't. You want to be invited. You want someone to notice what you need without being asked. So instead of saying it plainly, you wait, quietly hoping someone will guess correctly. When the invitation doesn't come, when the help doesn't arrive, you don't say anything about it directly. You simply grow a little colder, a little quieter. The kind of quiet that everyone in the room can feel, even if nobody can name exactly what caused it. Nobody is told what's wrong. They're simply expected to figure it out. The way you believe people who truly love you should already know. But love isn't a guessing game. And the people around you, unable to solve a puzzle they were never given the pieces to, begin to feel like they're constantly failing a test with no visible questions. Eventually, some of them stop trying to guess it all, not because they stopped caring, but because walking on eggshells around an expectation nobody ever spoke out loud is exhausting in a way that very few people can sustain forever. Think about a birthday that passes with a phone call instead of a visit, when what you actually wanted was for someone to show up in person. You don't say that you wanted more. You simply let a certain flatness enter your voice, thank them politely, and hang up. They sense something was wrong. They just don't know what. because you never told them what enough would have looked like in the first place. The next year, they might try harder, guessing at what might satisfy you. Sometimes they guess right. More often they don't, because your expectations were never actually communicated. They were simply supposed to be understood, the way you believe people who truly love you should understand things without being told. And when the guess is wrong again, the disappointment repeats itself, quietly, until the people around you start to feel like there's no version of showing up that will ever be declared sufficient. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from loving someone whose needs are never stated but always evaluated afterward. A daughter-in-law spends weeks planning a family gathering, trying to anticipate every preference, every comfort, every small detail she imagines might matter to you. She arranges the seating, the menu, the timing, all based on careful observation rather than anything you've actually told her. And afterward, you mention, almost in passing, that you wish the gathering had been held somewhere else, or that a different date would have worked better, or that you'd have preferred a different arrangement entirely. You don't say it as a complaint exactly. It arrives more like a wistful observation, but she hears it as confirmation of something she suspected for years, that no amount of careful guessing will ever quite hit the mark, because the mark itself was never actually placed anywhere she could see it. Eventually, the guessing stops. Not out of resentment necessarily, but out of simple fatigue. People can only play a game with invisible rules for so long before they stop wanting to play at all. Number 5. You ask questions that are really criticism in disguise. Are you really planning on wearing that tonight? You're still working at that company after everything you told me about it? Don't you think you're spending an awful lot on that kitchen remodel? Are you sure that's how you want to handle things with him? Grammatically, every one of those sentences ends with a question mark. Emotionally, they're not questions at all. They're judgments, wearing curiosity as a disguise. When someone reacts to the tone underneath, the instinctive defense is always the same. Goodness, I was only asking. But the people in your life know you weren't only asking. They recognize the undertone. They feel the scrutiny sitting quietly beneath the words. Adults who've spent 20 or 30 years making their own decisions, paying their own bills, raising their own families, don't want to be placed on trial every time they walk through your door. Consider what actually happens after enough of these questions accumulate. Your son stops mentioning his career changes before they're already finalized, because bringing them to you earlier only invites a version of interrogation disguised as interest. Your daughter starts editing what she shares about her home, her spending, her parenting choices, filtering out anything that might invite one of these questions before it even has the chance to land. There's a specific pattern that develops in families where this habit takes root. Conversations begin to happen in two versions. The surface version shared with you, carefully edited for safety, and the real version shared with a spouse, a sibling, a close friend, someone who won't turn an update into an evaluation. You end up, without realizing it, receiving the sanitized headlines of people's lives, while the actual texture of what they're experiencing gets shared somewhere else entirely, with someone who has earned the right to hear it plainly. The cruelest part of this particular habit is how invisible it remains to the person doing it. You genuinely believe you're staying close, staying informed, staying involved in the lives of people you love. What you don't see is the quiet editing happening on the other end, the careful curation of what gets mentioned and what gets left out, all of it designed around a single unspoken goal: getting through the conversation without triggering one more question that isn't really a question at all. People don't hate questions. They hate feeling examined, evaluated, and quietly found wanting every single time they step into a room with you. Number 4, you keep score of everything you've ever done for people. After everything I gave up for you, who do you think helped with the down payment on your first house? I never treated my own parents the way you treat me. Sacrificing for the people you love is one of the most genuine forms of devotion there is. Helping your children get on their feet is one of the real joys of a long life. The damage begins the moment those past acts of love get converted into an invoice you keep trying to collect on, years or even decades later. When old sacrifices get pulled out in the middle of a disagreement, the person across from you is left holding an uncomfortable question they never wanted to ask. Was that real love, or was it a loan I didn't realize I was taking out? Real gifts don't come with a repayment plan attached. The moment your past kindness becomes a tool for demanding present compliance, gratitude quietly curdles into resentment. And once that shift happens, it rarely reverses itself just because you eventually stop mentioning it out loud. The ledger has already been seen, and it's hard to unsee. There's a particular kind of silence that follows the first time someone hears their own history recited back to them as evidence. A daughter who mentions she can't help with something this weekend, only to be reminded of every weekend she was helped with as a child, learns something permanent in that exchange. She learns that every act of generosity in this family comes with fine print, discovered only when it's called in. After that, something shifts in how she receives your help going forward. What used to feel like love now arrives with a faint, unspoken question attached. What will this cost me later? And once help starts feeling like debt, people begin declining it, even when they genuinely need it, simply to avoid adding another entry to a ledger they never agreed to keep. This pattern often reaches its sharpest point during moments that should be purely celebratory. A grandchild's graduation, a wedding, a milestone birthday, occasions meant to be about joy somehow become the setting for a recitation of everything that made the moment possible, delivered as though gratitude requires an annual renewal rather than existing simply because it happened once, genuinely, and remains true regardless of whether it gets repeated out loud. The people receiving these reminders usually do feel grateful underneath the discomfort. That's part of what makes the dynamic so painful for everyone involved. They're not ungrateful people being confronted with an uncomfortable truth. They're grateful people being made to perform their gratitude on command. At moments, the performance was never actually necessary because the gratitude was already there, quietly, the whole time. Number 3, you punish people for finally calling or visiting. This is the one that punishes the exact behavior you say you want most. Someone finally calls after a few busy weeks, and instead of warmth, they're met with, well, look who finally remembered I exist. Someone visits on a Sunday afternoon, and the first words out of your mouth are what I was starting to think you'd forgotten where I lived. You mean it as a joke most of the time. Sometimes you mean it as an honest expression of how much you miss them. But what actually lands is neither of those things. What lands is punishment, delivered at the precise moment someone did the thing you claim to want. Their mind doesn't register the affection buried underneath the comment. It registers the sting. And slowly, without either of you fully realizing it, your presence becomes associated with a small emotional tax rather than warmth. People begin bracing themselves before they call, rehearsing what they'll say, trying to get ahead of the line they already know is coming. Here's the tragic part. The more you punish people for staying away, the less pleasant you make it for them to come back. Eventually, they call less, not more. Not because they stopped loving you, but because they're tired of walking into a conversation that's already keeping score against them before it even begins. Picture the version of this that plays out over years rather than a single phone call. A grandson who used to visit spontaneously just because he happened to be nearby starts calling ahead first, mentally preparing for the greeting he knows is coming. Eventually, he stops the spontaneous visits altogether, replacing them with scheduled, briefer ones, because scheduled visits at least come with the ability to leave on time. You experience this as him visiting less. What actually happened is that you slowly converted every reunion into an audit, and he responded the way most people respond to audits, by minimizing how often he submits to one. Number 2, you say you want honesty, then punish people for giving it to you. This one is quieter than the others, and it takes longer to notice, because it usually starts with genuinely good intentions on both sides. You ask your daughter directly why she doesn't visit more. You tell her you want the truth, that she can say anything to you, that you'd rather know than wonder. She believes you, so she tells you. Maybe she says the visits feel tense lately. Maybe she says she needs you to stop commenting on how she's raising the kids. Maybe she simply says she's exhausted and needs more space than she's been given. And in that moment, something in you contracts. You get quiet or hurt or defensive. You didn't mean to ask for honesty you weren't ready to actually receive, but the reaction happens anyway, faster than you can catch it. She notices. She always notices. And the lesson she takes from that exact moment is simple and permanent. I will never tell her the truth again. From then on, you get the version of her life that's been edited for your comfort. Everything's fine. Work's just been busy. Nothing's wrong. Don't worry about it. You wanted the truth. What you taught her to give you instead was a performance. This pattern tends to repeat itself with everyone in your life who tries honesty exactly once. A friend mentions gently that a particular habit of yours bothers her. You go quiet for the rest of the visit or bring it up again weeks later in a slightly wounded tone. She notices. She files it away. The next time something bothers her, she decides it isn't worth the aftermath, and she simply doesn't mention it. Multiply that single decision across every relationship in your life, repeated over years, and you end up surrounded by people who have collectively decided that the version of you comfortable enough to be told the truth doesn't actually exist. What remains is politeness, surface conversation, a closeness that looks intact from the outside, but has quietly hollowed out from the inside, one avoided truth at a time. Number 1, you make every single visit feel like a test they can never pass. This is the one that quietly explains most of the others, and it's built out of small moments that each seem completely innocent on their own. Think about how an ordinary afternoon actually unfolds. They arrive at your door. You're 30 minutes late. I thought you said 1 o'clock. They bring lunch from the deli down the street, hoping to save you the trouble of cooking. You spent too much money. I already had leftovers in the fridge. They check their phone once for an urgent work message. I suppose that little screen is more important than your family. They stand up to leave after 2 full hours. Leaving already? You just got here. They kiss your cheek and promise to come back next Sunday. We'll see if you actually remember this time. Look closely at what just happened in that single visit. They showed up, but they were late. They brought something thoughtful, but it was the wrong choice. They gave you 2 hours of their time, but it wasn't enough. They promised to return, but they weren't believed. Every single step of that afternoon was quietly graded, and they failed every question on a test they didn't know they were taking. Nobody wants to spend their limited free time visiting someone when the outcome is already decided before they've even walked through the door. I want you to sit with something for a moment. Imagine you're the one arriving at that door. You've rearranged your afternoon, fought traffic, brought something you thought would be appreciated. And within the first 60 seconds of walking in, you already know from decades of experience that nothing you're about to do in the next 2 hours will be quite right. Do you drive there eagerly next time? Or do you start finding reasons the visit needs to be shorter, the schedule tighter, the excuse more convenient? This is precisely how families quietly drift without a single dramatic argument ever taking place. Nobody storms out. Nobody says a cruel word in anger. Visits simply become shorter. Phone calls become less frequent. Holiday gatherings start requiring more advanced planning and more convenient excuses for why this year might be different. And through all of it, the person applying the test rarely understands what's happening. From your side, you're not administering an exam. You're simply noticing things. The lateness, the money spent, the phone, the brevity of the visit. Each observation feels reasonable in isolation. What you don't see is the cumulative weight they carry when delivered one after another, visit after visit, year after year. There's a particular kind of parent or grandparent who becomes famous within a family for this pattern, though nobody ever says so directly. The grandchildren learn it first, usually before they're old enough to understand what they're learning. They notice that visits to this house require a certain kind of bracing beforehand, a mental rehearsal of what might be criticized this time. By adulthood, they've often developed an entire private language with their siblings for managing these visits. Coded glances, quick changes of subject, an unspoken agreement about how long is long enough before someone can reasonably suggest it's time to go. None of this happens because anyone stopped loving anyone. It happens because love, filtered constantly through disappointment and evaluation, starts to feel like something closer to obligation. And people will fulfill an obligation. They will show up for a duty, but they will not bring their whole hearts to a room where their whole hearts have never quite been enough. The great tragedy in all 7 of these is that they almost never come from malice. They come from something much more vulnerable: the fear of being forgotten, the fear of no longer mattering, the fear that after a long life you might not hold the place in someone's heart that you hoped you would. Every single one of these 7 behaviors is, underneath the surface, a request to matter, a request to be included, a request for proof that decades of loving someone still counts for something in a life that has moved on to its own priorities, its own schedule, its own family. But requests delivered as guilt, as scorekeeping, as quiet tests, rarely land the way they're intended. They get received as burden instead of need. And burdens, no matter how much love originally motivated them, eventually get set down by the people carrying them. The paradox of growing older is this: the tighter you grip people through guilt, through scorekeeping, through quiet tests they never agreed to take, the faster they slip through your hands entirely. Connection cannot be extracted through pressure. It can only be invited. There's a version of aging that looks completely different from what we've just described. It belongs to people who somehow become easier to be around as the years accumulate, rather than harder, whose houses feel like relief instead of exams, whose phone calls feel like warmth instead of a tally being kept just out of sight. What separates them isn't luck. It's usually one decision, made and remade many times. The decision to receive whatever someone offers, however late, however imperfect, however brief, as enough. Sometimes, without realizing it, the way we ask for love makes love harder to give. If you recognized yourself in one of these, that recognition isn't something to carry shame over. What actually changes things is simpler than an elaborate solution. Noticing. Noticing the sigh before you say hello. Noticing the comment forming before it leaves your mouth. Noticing the moment you're about to turn someone else's story into an opportunity to tell your own. The people who love you are not asking for perfection. They're asking for a version of you that makes their presence feel welcomed rather than evaluated, wanted rather than merely tolerated until the visit can reasonably end. Which of these 7 is the hardest to recognize in ourselves? And if someone you love does one of them, what do you wish they understood? Tell me in the comments.